The first time I ever saw Sam was at one of the Texas conventions. And ahead of time, someone had said that he was going to put up a white screen after dark and people were going to come and look at moths. And I thought to myself, well, that'll take 10 or 12 people. There must have been 65 people just hanging off every word Sam said. It was so exciting. Beautiful, intricate, active predators throughout their lives, the best natural mosquito control, and numerous in Texas, dragonflies. Sam will lead us on an exploration of these amazing insects. We should learn about their biology, their importance in ecosystems, and how they do what they do. Sam will also talk about how to document these predators and learn how to fill in some of the data gaps of their distribution. Hopefully, he will guide you in some new and fun ways to appreciate these magnificent creatures while also contributing to their conservation and management. Sam Kieschnick is an urban wildlife biologist with TPWD, serving the east side of the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex. He previously worked as a native educator with the City of Mansfield at Oliver Native Park, as a naturalist at Fort Worth Nature Center and Refuge, as a science interpreter with the Fort Worth Museum of Science and History, and as a botanist with BRIT. He was also an instructor at Weatherford College. He has a master's degree from Tarleton State University studying the genetics of pocket gophers. And as an urban wildlife biologist, Sam's focus will be on the 3 A's: awareness, appreciation, and action. Welcome, Sam.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction there. I really enjoyed that plant of the month prompt. Way cool. And I kind of would like to hear on the chat, even though I can't really monitor their chat, but chime in if you have a mulberry somewhere either in your landscape or close to you. Mulberries, and I just got to see Morris microphylla, the Texas mulberry at Balcones this past weekend. Really, really cute. They got these itty bitty leaves, little tiny leaves. The red mulberry, we sometimes see a little bit more. It's a native one, so great, great plant. Chime in if you have that in your landscape. I'm going to be talking tonight about dragonflies, but my heart still belongs to plants. I was very, very lucky in my life to get to work at BRIT, Botanical Research Institute of Texas. And I would like to formally invite you to come up to BRIT in Fort Worth if you haven't been here before. It is the coolest of cool places. And the herbarium is actually pretty cold. So it is doubly cool, even in its temperature. But when I was working there at BRIT, my buddies would bust my chops sometimes because I would file for like 8 hours a day. I'd just file. They'd say, "What'd you do today?" And I said, "I filed." But when you're filing plant specimens from the east side of Mount Kilimanjaro, or you're filing a plant specimen collected in Indian territory in 1850, when you hold a plant specimen collected by Ferdinand Landheimer, by George Engelmann, by these legendary botanists, Julian Reverchon, the guys that have the names that are attached to plants, when you get to hold these, it's a really special feeling. So as plant enthusiast, I formally invite you to come up to BRIT to see plants. One thing that was also different when I was working at BRIT is I kind of had my blinders on. I had my blinders on to focus just at plants. Everything else was just not a plant. So I would focus on just the plants, and I wouldn't really look at the things that were using the plants. It was after I became more of a naturalist, an ecologist, a nature enthusiast, that I started recognizing that plants are the foundation for all of the other critters. And even tonight, I'll bring that up when I talk about these critters called dragonflies. And I'll start out by just recognizing my own bias. Dragonflies are cool. Dragonflies are freaking awesome. They are such cool, amazing, interesting critters. And the more that you look at them, the more that you observe them, the more that you learn about them, the more that you appreciate them. They are the perfect aerial predators, and they're just Beautiful. They're so cool. They're so interesting. They're so awesome. But let's talk about why they are these things. And I'd like to introduce another creature to you. On this one, in the chat, say either yes or no if you love mosquitoes. Okay, so a simple answer, yes or no to the question, do you love mosquitoes? Yes or no? Do you love mosquitoes? Love? Really? Love? Mosquitoes are present. They are abundant. You guys get them down on the coast in waves, probably. I actually remember when I first started my parks and wildlife job, I went to Sheldon Lake, the state park. And I remember the mosquitoes were so bad that I would be walking, I'd walk somewhere and I'd stop, and you would feel the mosquitoes hit your back because there were so many and they were following you so quickly. Mosquitoes, yes, they're important in the ecosystem, but man, are they annoying. They are super annoying bugs. Even the sound that zzz, if you've ever had one in your room and you're trying to sleep, you can hear that zzz, sort of drilling into your brain. So we have mosquitoes here. So how do we get rid of, or at least reduce or minimize the impact of this number of mosquitoes? Well, what some people do is they'll put up a bug zapper, and they'll sit by the bug zapper and hear the zzz, 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 zzz. And the individual that owns the bug zapper thinks, aha, I finally am taking care of these mosquitoes. Well, bug zappers are really good at zapping bugs, but not mosquitoes. Bug zappers don't work for mosquitoes. And Bev was mentioning this earlier with the mothing and the sheets that come to our moth lights, which are basically the bug zappers without the zap. Very few mosquitoes are active at night. They're more active at dusk and dawn. So when you put on a bug zapper and you hear that zip, 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 it's not the mosquitoes that are getting zapped. It's more likely the moths and the little beetles, the non-biting midges that are being annihilated and fried by these bug zappers. Bug zappers don't work for mosquitoes. So you may think of some of the other critters that have been known for tackling our mosquitoes. And I almost don't like telling this to folks because I still want these critters to be appreciated. But bats and purple martins don't really eat a lot of mosquitoes. I know. I can hear you cringing. It's true, they don't really eat many mosquitoes. There was an interesting paper that was published in like the 50s or the 60s that says that bats eat like 100 mosquitoes a minute. And when you read that paper, you learn a little bit more about it. And the bats are in a closed container, and all they are given is mosquitoes. So yeah, if all you're given is mosquitoes, that's all that you'll eat. But the reality when studying the fecal material of bats and even purple martins is that mosquitoes make up a very small percentage of their diet. They're eating other things like beetles and like moths, the bigger critters that make that flight on the wing possible. Not really many mosquitoes. So what is the perfect killer of a mosquito? The dragonfly. Dragonflies are the best, the ultimate mosquito killer. They are adapted to taking out mosquitoes. That is what they do. And yeah, they'll eat other things as well, but mosquitoes make up a perfect part of their diet. And it's good to see a lot of mosquitoes. So let's go into or I'm sorry, did I say it's good to see a lot of mosquitoes? I meant to say it's good to see a lot of dragonflies that are eating the mosquitoes. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what these dragonflies are. And we'll talk about their taxonomy first. They're in the insect order Odonata. When the people early on were looking at all the bugs, in combination and trying to parse them all out, they looked at the mandibles of dragonflies and saw that they were toothed. So odonate means toothed insect or toothed critter. It's not really that great of a distinction since a lot of bug mandibles have edges that look like teeth. Nonetheless, it stuck, and now we call these odonates or odes. There are around 6,000 species globally, give or take, of dragonflies and damselflies. So it's a pretty speciose group, and they're all predators. And I'm sure they all would love to have a mosquito for dinner. I said it earlier, dragonfly and damselfly. Sometimes these are broken up into separate groups, different suborders, but there are some other differences that we can see in dragonflies and damselflies. We'll start out with the dragonflies. Sometimes they're in a suborder or a grouping called Anisoptera or Epiprocta. They're usually larger and stockier, so a little bit more bulky. The hind wings are broader at the base. So their wings, their four wings, the two pairs of wings, aren't always the same size. With most of our dragonflies, I think all of our dragonflies, the hind wings are a little bit more broad at the base. If you look at those lovely compound eyes of dragonflies, they're usually kind of close together. In some cases, they're even touching there in the middle. And when they rest, usually they have their wings stretched out like that. Let's compare and contrast that with damselflies, Zygoptera. These guys typically are smaller, more slender. Again, they love eating skeeters, so they'll be big enough to take down a mosquito, but smaller and more slim than our dragonflies. The wings are usually the same shape, though. So their hind wings and their forewings, so all four wings are at least the same shape, usually the same size too. The eyes, those compound eyes, are further apart, almost like a hammerhead shark. So they're further apart, and usually, not always, but usually when they're resting, they'll have their wings folded flat along the back. So yes, they're super interesting, but I even think that the life history of these things is interesting. Super cool to see them flying around, but thinking of their other stages in life is also super fascinating. We'll start out with the eggs. So with our dragonflies, all of the dragonflies that I can think of need water at some point in their life. They need to have an aquatic stage. So they need to lay their eggs pretty close to water. When we look at this lovely picture produced by one of my dear friends, Greg Lastly, a lot of these pictures tonight are going to be from Greg Lastly, rest in peace. He inspired me to become interested in dragonflies, and he's also a great photographer. So when I look at the picture of these two dragonflies, we have the male that's holding on romantically to the female by the neck as she dips in her abdomen to lay the eggs into the pond or creek or ditch or whatever it might be that has some water. With some of our dragonflies, they'll even chisel in those eggs into some aquatic vegetation too. Then we have kind of a scary looking stage. This is called the naiad, the immature stage of our dragonflies. And I hope I'm not giving anybody bad dreams tonight with this slide, but they have such a cool structure called an extendable labrum, or basically a bottom lip with an extendable pharynx, that when they see their potential prey, they'll look at it, and then this thing just extends out and grabs it and brings it back to the mouth. So they're eating mosquitoes as adults. They're eating mosquito larvae as youngsters, as teenagers, as the naiads. In this stage, they're also predators of other aquatic stuff. But you can see where I don't know if you've seen that movie Alien lately, but you can see where the inspiration for that comes. It comes from science fiction, comes from a lot of our insects. So that extendable pharynx reaching out, grabbing on to a little aquatic critter for supper. And then we have our emergent stage. And actually, in chat, if you wouldn't mind saying, have any of you ever watched a cicada emerge from its shell? Have you ever watched that before, or at least seen the shells of cicadas around? If you have, chime in on the chat with a yes, I've seen that before. The same sort of thing happens with our dragonflies. That aquatic stage, much like the ground dwelling stage of the cicada, emerges up out of the water, or in the cicada, out of the ground, emerges up, it perches on, it holds on to a structure, probably some aquatic vegetation that's emerged out of the water, and it too will emerge. One thing, and I can see probably several folks that mentioned, yes, you've seen that before with the cicada shells. Look closer. Look closer at the shells of those cicadas. If you pry them open, you might see these white strings that sort of come out. And those white strings, as you can see on the picture of the dragonfly here, those white strings are actually the breathing tubes of the insect. So when it sheds its exoskeleton, when it sheds that outer layer to emerge as a cicada, or in this case, as a dragonfly, those tubes that it uses to breathe, the trachea, the spiracles, like taking off a wet sock, just come out too, and you'll see them in the little strings. So that's a challenge that I have for you. Next time you see a cicada shell, pry that open and you might see those little strings. Those were the breathing holes of that critter. The emergence of our dragonflies, same sort of thing. It crawls out, it emerges, it pumps fluid into the wings to sort of flatten those out and harden those too. And its lifestyle has changed, and now it's on the wing. And as it is with most bugs, what does adulthood mean? Well, adulthood is all about finding love. That's what it's all about, finding love. So they are looking for that mate. They're going to try to find that mate, reproduce, hopefully, and put some new eggs for the next generation to continue the lineage. In dragonflies, they're very protective partners. And a lot of times with our damselflies or our dragonflies, the males either will physically hold on to the female with claspers to prevent any other male from coming around, or they'll fly around and guard the female so no other sneaky male can come in and contribute his DNA. You'll see on the picture, I think towards the left, the ones with the damselflies, the blue, they create this lovely little heart pattern. You can maybe see the heart of the abdomens together. The male in this case is the one that's grabbing onto the female. The female takes her abdomen and comes up underneath and grabs the sperm of the male. In our right side, you can see two dragonflies, and the male, the bluer one, is flying around, protecting, patrolling that female so she can lay eggs without being grabbed by another male. So on the wing, they are predators, and they are truly adapted to predaceous lifestyle. One of the kind of interesting things, another interesting thing about dragonflies is their leg shape and size. When they're flying around, kind of like our bats, they're eating on the wing. So they don't really grab like an eagle, grab a fish, bring it over to the tree, and then nibble on it. What dragonflies and damselflies typically do is grab onto things on the wing and eat them. So to do this, they have asymmetrical legs. The front pair of legs are typically shorter than the middle pair, and then that's shorter than the hind pair. So they're flying around with this net that they'll use to grab on to those mosquitoes that are pestering us. A neat adaptation. It's okay to stare. If you want to stare, please stare at the eyes of a dragonfly. Amazing. I mean, you can get lost in those eyes. Just a little background biology. Those are compound eyes. The big ones are compound eyes that you'll see. And they're made up of lots of individual lenses. And each one of these lenses on our dragonflies is an image forming structure, almost like a computer. And it feeds all of these images into the neural ganglion. And somehow it processes all of these images to see predator, prey, threat, time to relax, potential mate, all of these things it's processing with those big, big eyes. One thing that you'll also notice is the eyes go pretty much all around the head. It makes up most of the head. So they're looking up, they're looking down, they're looking left, they're looking right, all at the same time. It's amazing that they can process all that information. What's even more interesting, I think, is how they view the world. With us, we have trichromatic vision. So 3 opsin genes to determine the colors of things. With our dragonflies, 15 to 33 opsin genes. I don't want to bore people too much with the genetics here and the phenotypic characteristics of these genes. The point of it is they have so much ability to process the environment and the colors of the environment that they're just amazing hunters. They can see the different colors, the different shapes, and things that we can't even process. So Helen was earlier talking about monarchs, and I love monarchs, no doubt about it. I love monarchs, and they get a lot of credit for being the insect that migrates. Well, other insects migrate too. Dragonflies, some of our dragonflies migrate. And this one that you have down there in Harris County and pretty much throughout Texas, actually, is called the common green darner. If you've seen this one in real life, go ahead and write a "yep, I've seen it" in the chat. So have you seen a common green darner before? It looks a little bit like that picture in the center circle. Did you know that these guys migrate? And kind of like our monarchs, it's the grandparents and parents that move around. So it's the 3rd generations on these two. I don't want to read it right here, but you can see this track that they move 400 miles up, 400 miles back down. This migration is pretty interesting. And another cool thing about this paper, they actually used 120 years of data. They went into insect collections and they documented different isotypes in there to see where these dragonflies have gone throughout their life. But 400 miles north and 400 miles south is pretty extensive migration for our dragonflies. As hopefully you're observing, dragonflies you might see as it gets a little bit warmer, and yeah, it's starting to get a little bit warmer. When it's super hot, they will do this obelisk pose. And much like the Egyptian structures, they'll put their hiney straight up, their abdomen straight up to reduce the surface area so that the rays of the sun aren't hitting the flat abdomen. It's putting it up just like a point to reduce the amount of heat generation in the body. So you can see it, and it's called the obelisk pose as we're looking at these blue dashers. So let's look at a few of our dragonflies that we see here in Texas. There's about, give or take, 160 species of dragonflies. And I'm going to show some examples along with the differences between males and females. Several of our dragonflies have this sexual dimorphism where the girl looks a bit different than the boy. So we'll start out with the eastern pond hawk, a lovely dragonfly found in Harris County, found throughout at least most of the east part of Texas and I think of the United States. We have our female that looks a little more green, and then our male that has a little bit more of a bluish color. Young males can sometimes look greenish too. So this one is probably a young male that has little splashes of green on it. I typically find these eastern pond hawks around ponds. So you'll also see a lot of our odonates, a lot of our dragonflies and damselflies that are habitat specialists, or maybe, not necessarily generalist, but want either slow water or fast water. So with our pond hawk, I see them at slow water ponds, ditches, drainage ditches, tanks as well. Then we have the one that I was just talking about that migrates around, the common green darner. You can see that male that is holding onto the neck of the female as she is dipping her eggs down into the ground. They're not too different in color and shape and size from male and female, although I think that the male might be a little bit more vibrant blue and green than the female. Another super common one, but a lovely one, the blue dasher. I find blue dashers where I find eastern pond hawks, typically ponds, lakes, drainage ditches, tanks, cattle tanks, whatever it might be. The female, much more yellow than that blue male. And the blue dasher, as it is sometimes, we get so familiar with our common species. We get so familiar with the things that we see them all the time, and we kind of forget how magnificent they are. When I was down in the valley birding with some folks, there was a couple that came from England, and they said, Sam, and I'm not going to do an English accent. Okay, I'll try. Sam, my goodness, we saw the best bird ever. Is that good British? I don't know. We saw, and my wife's kind of giggling at me. She remembers who they were. They said, we saw the coolest bird today, a northern cardinal. And I said, oh, yeah, we have those here in Texas. So it was a familiar bird to me, and you kind of forget how magnificent they are because they're familiar. I'm bringing this all up to say, look closely at the blue dasher dragonfly. Amazing. It is magnificent, the colors, especially on those compound eyes. The common whitetail, we have another one that has, the male has a white tail. So what can we call it? Let's call it a whitetail. The male, very showy, bright white tail, no white in the wings. The female doesn't have as much white, maybe some patches of white on there, but different banding on the wings. The widow skimmer also has a white tail. The male has a white tail, but has some white patches on the wings. Sometimes these two get confused, and I have to kind of remember, okay, they both have white tails. Which one is the white tail? Well, the widow skimmer has white in the wings as well with the male. The female widow skimmer has very yellow abdomen and thorax too. Then we have some really bright red dragonflies. This one, the flame skimmer. In some areas of Texas, there's the neon skimmer. They look very, very similar. The red coloration in the wings is a little bit different in those two species. The male, bright red, and it patrols its territory. If you're ever at a creek and you see a flame skimmer, you'll see it sitting on a perch, and if any other skimmer comes close, it'll chase it right off. So they're very territorial, protecting their area for any females coming in. Another really neat one is the Halloween pennant. Look at the banding on those wings. Tremendous. One artist, gosh, I can't remember the name. A famous artist said, art begins where nature ends. And you can see, our best art is just imitations of what beauty we can see in nature. So look at the patterns on those wings, quite tremendous. This is a group that's also, or this species, not too different between male and female. There probably are some differences, but to me, at least with the wings, they're quite similar. Okay, so a few of our dragonflies. Now let's look at a few of our damselflies. Fewer in number of species of our damselflies, give or take about 77 species in Texas. Again, you'll remember a few of those characteristics: smaller, slimmer, the wings at rest, they'll put them towards the back in most. There is an exception. This one, the familiar bluet. And kind of weird about our familiar bluets, I'll see these guys on a prairie. I'll see these guys well away from a water source. Yeah, they're going to go to that water source when it's time to mate, to lay eggs, and all that sort of stuff. But I'll see these familiar bluets in my backyard, in a prairie, in a grassy area. I'll see these chomping down on some of the little bugs, hopefully mosquitoes. The powdered dancer, this genus Argia, this is the dancers. These guys love fast moving water. So they like water that's probably a little bit more oxygenated, has a little bit more of a flow to it. That's where I'll see the powdered dancer. In this one, the male is the one on the right side holding on to the neck of that female. Then we have another one called the fragile forktail, a pretty tiny little damselfly, charming little thing. I remember the name fragile forktail. When you look at the thorax, or the sort of the mid part of the damselfly, you can see what looks like an exclamation point. Do you see that? It looks a little bit like a neon exclamation point, and this tells me fragile. Fragile with an exclamation. So that's one of the ways that I remember this one, fragile forktail. The ebony jewel wings, these are way cool. I'm pretty sure that you have them there in Harris County. They're more of an East Texas, Eastern United States damselfly, a great place to go looking for damselflies and dragonflies. Gus Engling Wildlife Management Area. If you've not been there before, you need to go. It is just the best place to look at all sorts of stuff. Dragonflies too, and they have a healthy population of these ebony jewel wings. The male and the female look somewhat similar. The male is a little bit more maybe sparkling ebony or kind of that greenish color, but the female has these little white structures on the wings, and those are called pterostigma. All of our dragonflies and damselflies have these little specialized cells called pterostigma, and they kind of help in its flying around. But in this case, it's one of the ways that we tell a boy from a girl. The girls have bright white ones, and the males have kind of darker ones that you can't really see when looking at the whole wing. And then what I love about biology are the rule breakers. You know, there's the black, the white, the left, the right, the good, the bad, and then there's that big middle section where everything cool happens. So the giant spread wing, this Archelestes, this is a group of spread wing damselflies. So in most cases, damselflies rest with their wings flat. This one rests with its wings spread out. But if you look at the other structures, the wings are about the same shape and size. Those eyes pretty far apart. Those it's still following a little bit of the rules. Who cares? I think we should all address this question more often in everything we do. Who cares? What is the importance of this kind of stuff? Yes, no doubt that they're eating mosquitoes and they're helping us with that pest. But they're also really interesting when they tell us things about the ecosystem. The more species of dragonflies that you'll see in an area, that tells us the healthier the ecosystem is. We get water quality. We get a water quality measurer in these flying insects. You can tell the high quality water because there will be more species of dragonflies and damselflies. Some of our species are very specialist, can only live in a certain level of pollution. Other ones are pretty generalist, that you can see them, you know, right roadside where they're getting a lot of oil spillover. But most of our dragonflies are pretty sensitive to our pollutants. So they tell us a little bit more about the entire ecosystem. And the general question that I like to address too is, yeah, I get annoyed by mosquitoes. How do I get more dragonflies in my yard? And I like to talk, as I'm talking to a native plant group, it starts with the plants. So the plants that you use, if you use a wider variety of plants, not only is it super fun to see the different types of plants, but also those different types of plants are different types of food for different types of bugs. And those different types of bugs are food for different types of birds and so on and so forth. And the predators, those dragonflies, may be going after some of those different types of insects. So the more diversity that you have of plants, it's the foundation for the diversity of everything else. If you're lucky enough to have an aquatic feature in your backyard, putting in some of these plants that have a submersive stage, have a stage that stays underwater, but also is some that is emergent, that naiad can crawl out and emerge into the adult form. On one of these talks, I had a person that said, well, I don't have any aquatic features in my backyard, but I do have a bird bath. Well, bird baths are probably not the best things for our dragonfly habitat. You probably should splash out that bird bath a little bit more often. But if you have a more permanent aquatic feature in your yard, putting in those plants that feed out of the water is a good thing for dragonflies. So hopefully you're interested in dragonflies and you say, okay, I'm going to go outside and I want to look at some dragonflies. There are some ways that you can contribute to our knowledge of where dragonflies are. A great website is called Odonata Central. It is focused just on dragonflies. So to help you identify the certain dragonflies, you can search by a county and look at the dragonflies observed in your county. So Harris County, if that's where you are, or wherever, Austin County, Travis County, Bear County, wherever you may be, you can search for the dragonflies of that county. Or, and I don't know the last time I gave a presentation and didn't talk about iNaturalist, part of me wants to get a tattoo that's like a QR code, that will take people to iNaturalist. And I'm thinking about it. I don't know quite the right placement. iNaturalist, a powerful, wonderful website. I am bonkers about this tool. You can go out, you can contribute to our growing knowledge of where species are in time and in space. Dragonflies on iNaturalist is a pretty popular group. If you post a dragonfly, high percentage chance that you will get an identification for it or verification of what you think it might be. I'm searching by the Odonata dragonflies and damselflies of Texas on iNaturalist. I get 152,000 observations of the 238 give or take species in Texas. So it has that digital filterable field guide of what's out there. And if you're old school, if you like to feel the pages of knowledge, you want to get a field guide, there's some great field guides for our dragonflies and damselflies. John Abbott is a familiar name among people that study dragonflies. He's done quite a few books. He actually hosts that website, Odonata Central. He's active on iNaturalist too, but the books, if you do want to feel the pages of dragonflies, you can with these guides, Damselflies of Texas, Dragonflies in Texas, or Dragonflies and Damselflies of Texas. If you're trying to catch them, it's hard. It is hard to catch dragonflies. Again, think of those eyes. They can see everywhere. So patience is important when you're out hunting dragonflies or going out to observe them. If you do try to observe them or catch them with a net, it's a fun activity to do with little kids, or if you need some exercise to chase after a dragonfly. It's pretty hard to catch them, but if you do catch them, you can look at them up close, and that's where you can really start to appreciate the intricacies of all of these different structures and colors and shapes and sizes. Like I got lost in the eyes of this Prince basket tail dragonfly. So you thought this would be just a fun presentation to listen to as you relax. There is a homework assignment that I am giving you with this presentation. So I double dare you to go outside and find at least 5 different types of dragonflies, damselflies. Okay, you don't have to know their names, but go out and try to find 5 different types of dragonflies and damselflies. Yes, it's spring, and spring is just now starting, sort of. We're right at the edge of spring starting. They are more common and more abundant out in summer, but they're out, and they're out the closer you get to the coast too. So down in Harris County, I bet there are quite a few dragonflies and damselflies. So here's the challenge, what I've already dared you to do, find the 5. But hey, you know what? If you stop at step 1 and all you're doing is going outside, that's okay. I'll give you full partial credit for that. If you're going outside, good. That's the best part. If you want to do a little bit more, go outside, find a body of water, probably not the coast. I mean, I know the ocean's a big body of water, but they don't handle salt too well. But try to find an area of water, a pond, a creek, a ditch, or a lake. Go to that spot, sit, take a little moment, sit, rest, relax, start watching around the margin of this water source. Maybe you'll see some dragonflies and damselflies. If you're able to take a picture of them, they're kind of hard to do with our cell phones. You can, you just got to be patient with it. If you have a camera, you can step a little bit further off and let it sit down and take a picture of it. If you want to upload it to iNaturalist, you can, definitely can. On your 5th dragonfly, tag me at SamBiology, and I will give you so much respect. So much respect. You can take it to the bank. The main point here, engaging with nature. With that, I would love to address any questions or comments on dragonflies.
Well, we've got some. First question, do they need water that is not moving for larval development versus a stream?
A great question. Thank you so much for whoever asked that. Yes. So, well, I said yes so quickly. So they need water for their larvals, for the naiad stage, the incomplete metamorphosis, so for the young stage. But there are species like our dancers that their larvae persist and exist in those kind of fast-moving streams. And they're just good at holding on to things. Sometimes when you flip over a rock or a log in a fast-moving stream, you'll see some mayfly larvae, and you probably see some dragonfly or damselfly larvae too. So the different species need different movements of water on that.
Cool. Are mosquito dunks harmful to dragonflies?
Oh my goodness, a great question too. So the mosquito, those little Oreo things, those little things that have the bacteria that knock out mosquitoes, I don't know if that bacterium or whatever it is, if that is impactful to the dragonflies, but I think that everything is kind of linked. So if you're removing the food for the dragonflies, that probably impacts the dragonflies too. So, it's one of those things in a place of infestation. People will use these those little donut, what do you call it, mosquito drops in the
Dunks,
water.
yeah, dunks.
Yeah, those mosquito dunks that have some bacteria that knock out some mosquitoes. They're probably pretty good, but they're also removing the food for our dragonflies. So in that case, it probably does impact our dragonflies.
Okay, someone made a comment and said that they think dragonflies are controlled by the depth of the water and stay in water about 1 to 2 feet. Is that what you think?
And this is kind of interesting too, because I think it's very species specific. So some of them, and well, I'll go ahead and say this. So my wife and I do something kind of interesting. She's a big collector of quilts and of fabrics. This is one of her fabrics, this Charlie Harper fabric back here. We will go to fabric stores, and I drive to the fabric store, and while she's in the fabric store, I'm down in the ditch. I'm in the ditch looking for bugs. And even in the smallest, dinkiest of ditches, I will see the exuviae of dragonflies and damselflies. I'll see the skins, the shells of dragonflies and damselflies. So I think wherever there is water, no matter the depth, there's going to be some dragonflies that are utilizing it. I hope I addressed that question.
Oh, I think you did. Okay, Royce asked, she said it is difficult to find information on dragonfly migration. Do you have advice for her?
Thank you for asking that question. And it was something that was actually new to me. I didn't know that dragonflies migrated. So if there is a bunch of knowledge out there, it's probably in little corners. And I haven't found all the right corners to read some of this. I looked at some of the papers about the different migrations, those books, the field guides that I mentioned. They'll have little sections on the life behavior and biology, and they talk a little bit about migration too. But it's one of those things that's not really well, and I don't want to say not well known, but not well advertised. Maybe dragonflies needed better PR agent to talk about their amazing migration. But yeah, there are a few things out there about dragonfly migration, but not many.
How big of a backyard pond in gallons would be needed to support dragonflies?
Another really good question. So there is a person that I work with, a private landowner, and she has a little tiny, it used to be a koi pond, but now it's kind of just a bunch of mud in there with a little bit of vegetation. And she has got lots of dragonflies. I don't necessarily think it's amount of gallons, like what's the number of gallons that you need to have. Any sort of water source, if it's a permanent water source, you'll have dragonflies that come and visit it. So it's one of those kind of neat experiments that I think if you're able to, play with with your backyard, old koi pond or current koi pond or whatever it may be, to play around with the different levels of water to see how much is needed for dragonflies. I don't really think it's that much.
Okay, I'm going to squash a couple of questions together
Okay,
because they're similar.
great.
It seems like people want to know more specifically what plants they should plant for dragonflies.
Good. Let's talk plants. Yes, let's talk plants. So the sedges are really good, and they're not the showiest of plants. If you're trying to woo a person and you pick them a flower of a sedge, I think it's only a botanist that will address that date. So the flowers of our sedges are not super showy, but the sedges, the rushes, if you have an area that can support even the cattails, and I know that's kind of an aggressive plant, but it's great habitat for our dragonflies. So those aquatic, semi-aquatic plants in the cyperaceae and the typhaceae with our cattails are quite good. The water lotuses are also a really good one. There are some damselfly specialists that hang out on the pads of the water lotus too. So again, as I mentioned it in the presentation, the diversity of plants that you have in your yard, wherever it might be, the diversity of plants is the foundation for the diversity of everything else. So if you're trying to farm dragonflies, or if you want a lot of dragonflies in your yard, what kind of plants should you use? And I'll answer it with lots of different kinds. Lots of different kinds. But the sedges are really good because they have the aquatic part, and then usually that part that sticks up out of the water for those naiads to crawl up on.
How does the male attach to the female's neck and for how long?
This boy, get ready for romance here. Okay, so it has this structure called a clasper, and the clasper is this again quite romantic structure that just holds on to the female's neck. So it looks a little bit like a hook, and in the cases where they do that, it will hold on to there quite nicely. And what's also really fascinating, and kind of be cautious if you do the Google search for this, is dragonfly genitalia is very unique. And dragonfly genitalia has all these different structures and shapes and sizes. And we actually call this the lock and key mechanism, that dragonflies that have different shaped genitalia won't fit into the female, basically. So when they mate, it's very species specific on how they can get together, not just by the clasper, but also the genitalia. So that's a fun, if you're at a public library, be sure to leave the search engine open with dragonfly genitalia.
Okay. Back to migration. Do you know how many species migrate?
A great question, and I don't know. I know that that common green darner is one that does, and I predict a lot in that family. The Kieschnick, the darner family probably migrate. I don't know if it's as extensive as the common green darner. And I also don't know about the other dragonflies. And the follow-up question might be, well, where the heck do they go in winter? And I don't know what February of last year was for folks down in Houston. In Fort Worth, it was cold. In February, it was ice-pocalypse. So you'd go, how the heck does a critter that has an aquatic stage live in a pond that's frozen over? Well, during winter time, a lot of critters, fish too, they will go down to the bottom of the creek, the bottom of the lake, the pond, go to that section, and that layer of ice acts kind of like a blanket that blankets the bottom part of the water, and the dragonflies, they go through arrested development. They basically just stop moving, they slow down all of their metabolism and wait it out. So the ones that don't migrate, that probably have adults that just are alive for that season, the babies can live longer, and even when it gets super cold.
Another good question. Dragonflies, will any of them tolerate salt or brackish water? Or are they all freshwater babies?
A good question. So there are some, there's one called the seaside dragonlet that can tolerate some of the brackish waters. I don't think too many of them are able to tolerate high salinity. And that's kind of the case for a lot of our insects. And it goes maybe more towards their breathing structures. That salt crystallizes in their trachea. So there probably are a few that can tolerate somewhat brackish, but when you start getting out into the open waters there of the coast, it might be pretty tough living. But there is one called the seaside dragonlet that I will see that one down in the coast in some sort of ponds pretty close to the beach, but not out in the ocean.
How far do they fly in search of habitat and food? And what size territory do they protect?
Beautiful questions. Beautiful questions. So they are, again, species specific. Some of them tolerate other males kind of close. So like you'll have your pond and you'll have a group of blue dashers, and they kind of have a stick that they'll call their territory. This is also something I like to do when I'm out watching dragonflies. I'll find a little branch, I'll put it by the water's edge, just stick it out there, and I'll go back, I'll sit down and just watch. I'll watch to see which male calls that his territory, and he will take that as a perch. Some of them get along better than others. So with blue dashers, with eastern pond hawks, with some of the more common dragonflies, you'll see a whole bunch around a single pond. Other ones do not get along well with others. With the neon skimmer and the flame skimmer, those males hate each other. They cannot get along. And on one stream, you'll see a male patrolling back and forth all day long, just looking for boys to fight. So some of them get along okay, other ones really do not. So I don't know if there's really a habitat specific level that they go, like they'll only go 200 yards or 50 feet or whatever it might be. I think that's probably a species specific too. And that's what's kind of fun too about a lot of biology, the same with plants, is each plant has a unique pollinator, or each plant has is a host for a unique bug. And each of these dragonflies are different species, and they have different things that they eat, different ways that they live, different colors and shapes and all that sort of stuff. So that diversity is a beautiful cop-out answer to say it's dependent on the species.
No, but it's probably the right answer.
Yeah.
And then how high up do they fly?
Oh boy, there's one called the Texas Emerald. I think it's called the Texas Emerald. It's in East Texas. It flies above the pine trees. So it flies way up there. Super hard to catch. My goodness, you got to throw that net way up there. So it flies way above the treetops. So I don't know how far they get up, like atmospherically. Most of them, when they're finding their mates, when they're looking for prey, are going to be relatively close to the ground. But some of them do go up a little bit higher. If I could end it with a story here too, if that's all right.
Yes.
One of my favorite experiences when I was at Tarleton State in Stephenville, one of my absolute favorite experiences was seeing a cool food web, a food chain. So there was in one of the lawns outside of the library, there were ants that were emerging. So the emergent ants, they have wings, they fly up a little bit. Above that, above their flying area, I saw a dragonfly called the darner. I saw the darner flying around, grabbing some of those. Above that, I saw another dragonfly called the saddlebags flying up around that. Above that, I saw chimney swifts that were flying up and grabbing some of the things.